right, good afternoon. Welcome to day 2 of the Social Enterprise Summit International Symposium, and welcome to the Central Charities Foundation Inter-University Debating Cup on Social Innovation. 其實我係可以講廣東話，因為呢一節咧係有即時傳譯嘅，咁啊歡迎大家嚟到百人基金大學社創辯論杯。咁啊今日我哋有兩間大學嘅 Hall Debating Team 會喺呢個會展呢就嚟一次唇槍舌劍，因為我哋今次咧都嘗試喺唔同嘅角度咧睇下研究下究竟社會創新應該點樣做。咁啊過去咧我哋咁多年嘅社企民間高峰會咧都係用創業啊或者寫呢一個 business plan 嘅方式，就希望多啲大學生去參與做社企，因為計下數啊各樣。咁但係今年呢，我哋就希望呢可以由一個比較批判性啲嘅角度即係可唔可以用一個辯論嘅手法去探討下社會企業咧應該點樣行社會創新呢？咁所以就獲得即係港大同埋中大嘅幫忙啦，同埋我都要非常之多謝我哋籌委會成員嘅幫忙嘅。咁喺度先講一講呢，我哋嘅即時傳譯嘅頻道俾大家知先。Participants who require simultaneous interpretation, who get the headset, please turn to Channel 1 for English. Channel 1 for English. And also for 普通話 or Mandarin, please turn to Channel 3. 廣東話頻道就係2號㗎嚇，咁啊廣東話頻道係2號嘅。咁啊研討會進行期間呢，唔該大家將所有會叫啊、發聲啊、播音樂啊、會有音效嘅所有電子產品呢就熄咗佢。Please turn off all devices which produce sound during the event or keep them in silence mode, please. 咁我哋今日呢就會有兩隊辯論隊比賽嘅，咁啊分別呢就係正方嘅香港大學馬禮遜堂辯論隊嗰邊，冇企起身嗰個都係港大㗎嘛？再嚟多次啦，你哋一條 team 㗎嘛4位男丁。反方呢就喺我前邊，香港中文大學逸夫書院辯論隊。Hello。好啦，我不如先請大家咧，可唔可以將你哋頭先啲掌聲咧加大2倍，再邀請兩隊辯論隊上台，好嘛？哇，唔止2倍添喎，可以上嚟啦，可以上嚟啦。我哋今年咧就非常創新嘅，咁我哋咧就做咗2樣創新嘅嘢，因為話晒咧，我哋今年都希望可以創新於善。咁喺兩隊辯論隊上嚟嘅期間咧，我講下我哋邊2樣創新嘅嘢啦。咁啊，第一樣嘢咧，我哋今年咧就會係以今次呢個辯論比賽呢，將會以1人1票嘅方式呢去選出個冠軍嘅。咁呢個1人1票嘅投票方式呢，其實比較似現實嘅情況啦。咁啊，好多時候呢，我哋都知道辯論比賽呢就會係一個非常之有結構嘅辯論比賽嚟嘅。啲人要由頭聽到尾啦，然之後有幾位評判就坐喺前面啦，咁佢哋會就住某個百分比去評分啦。但係實際上呢，我哋會見到呢，真正喺社會上邊，如果要去辯論呢，尤其是係一啲議會嘅辯論，以至到係外國嘅總統嘅辯論呢，其實你唔會知道人哋幾時真係打開個電視，真係聽兩個候選人去即係對質嘅。咁所以我哋其實咧就想講，喂，如果你真係要做社會創新，你真係要進入個社會，你真係了解下我哋嘅觀眾係點投票嘅喎。咁我哋唔會見到有譬如法國總統辯論會喺下邊寫住颱風20個百分點啊，內容30個百分點啊，政綱40個百分點，唔會咁樣㗎。佢都係一個整體咁樣去接收㗎嘛。咁所以今日呢，我哋都希望大家呢可以用一個整體咁去接收。我哋冇設到評判1人1票嘅方式，呢個係比較即係新穎嘅做法。另外一樣新穎嘅做法呢，我哋就揾咗另外一間呢，就科技企業叫做 Keynote， 咁佢哋咧其實都係做緊好多即係社會創新嘅嘢嘅。咁咧我哋就會用呢個 mobile voting 嘅手機投票。咁如果你有呢個 QR code reader，咁你除咗可以反轉你本長刊，我哋有社企民間高峰會有個 QR code reader 之外咧，你都可以用你嘅手機投票嘅。咁如果你冇 QR code reader， 但係而家已經好想入去 download 下載嘅話咧，你就打 BIT 1點呢個 L 字嚟㗎嘛 ，LY 1 SES2013。咁我哋就有個專用嘅版面呢。咁留意呢 SES 係唔可以細草嘅，全部要 uppercase 嘅。咁如果你 download 唔到，咁呢就只係一個原因嘅啫。咁可以，我諗係會展嗰個上網速度可能有問題。咁都唔緊要，我哋預備咗一個後備嘅人肉投票箱 ，Mabel 攞出嚟睇睇，人肉投票箱，唔該你。係。我哋所有嘢都有 Plan B 嘅，做社會企業嚇。呢個呢就係如果你手機投唔到票呢，我哋都仲有個人肉投票箱，咁我哋會投票嘅。咁我哋一陣間如果你投唔到票嘅話呢，我哋就會再派發即係票俾你投，可以入 入落呢個箱度，我哋會點票㗎啦。bit.ly/SES2013 嚇，咁啊正方就係綠色票啦嚇，然之後反方係白色票。我費事唔係喎，如果兩個抌落去就應該一樣嘅咋係嘛？咁我抌落去咪一樣啦。好啦，現場咧就有75個觀眾嘅現時，咁咧就我哋亦都陸陸續續會叫啲78啱啱行多咗一位入嚟嚇，咁我哋咧就希望大家今日可以即係上 bit.ly/SES2013投票嘅。咁咧今日嘅辯題係社會企業係資本主義全球化之下嘅出路。咁呢個辯題我講解下點嚟嘅先。咁就係有一日咧，我哋就諗緊，喂，如果講社會企業，究竟係講緊社會主義啊，定係講緊資本主義啊？咁啊，我哋開會真係傾呢啲嘢嘅喎，30幾個 organising committee。咁啊，跟住傾下嘅時候呢，我哋嘅主席李正儀博士而家企喺後邊，就話：不如辯論呢條題目啦，呢條題目幾好啊！因為香港呢就係佢唔記得咗啦，已經係你噏出嚟嘅當日。咁啊，其實係講緊香港就正就係。無論你講適度有為也好，無論你係講緊積極不干預也好，無論你係講緊我哋所謂背靠個祖國係行緊呢一個咩有中國特色的社會主義也好，其實都係講緊社會主義同埋資本主義大家點樣去融合嘅，講緊個融合嘅價值嘅。咁有關融合價值好多嘅題目其實都可以喺我哋今日唔同嘅賣緊嘅書啦，以至到 Engage Hong Kong 啱啱出咗一本中文嘅報告叫做小心空隙，大家可以喺出邊攞到呢，都有講到呢一個問題嘅。咁所以我哋就話，不如作為年輕人，將來個經濟、將來個世界交俾你哋嘅時候，就辯論一條最大嘅題目啦。社會企業係唔係資本主義全球化之下嘅出路呢？咁如果你哋喺下載嗰個投票嘅 Apps 有問題嘅時候呢，我哋呢邊阿 Mabel 係舉手嚟睇下，係啦，可以揾佢或者戴口罩呢位叫 Eva 都可以揾佢幫手嘅嚇。咁我有請兩位工作人員上台，我哋就隨時開始啦。我想先請中大同埋港大試一試你哋台上面自由辯論嗰個咪，再試一試咪先好嘛？係一陣間我順便講埋啦，佢哋試咪嘅時候，你可以tap 呢一個 Discover Events 啦嚇，見到頭先個台下邊個藍色就係 Discover Events，如果你下載咗，一陣間我會再做一次俾你睇嘅，然之後再撳咧呢個 Inter-University Debating Club 有我哋 logo 嘅，撳完呢度之後呢，撳一次得㗎啦，唔使咁撳，唔使狂撳嘅。咁然之後呢，就揀你支持嗰一隊呢，就可以撳 vote 㗎啦。咁就中文大學辯論隊同埋香港大學辯論隊。For those who doesn't read Chinese, actually the one who program our apps is an English gentleman, but somehow he reads Chinese. Oh, hi, he's here. Oh, all right. Hi. You didn't put in English. Okay. The first button is Chinese University, and the second button is Hong Kong U. So you press vote after you select your teams. I will go through these slides with you again after the debate. In the meantime, I would like to ask the two teams to try out the mics. 正方香港大學馬禮遜堂辯論隊試一試咪先。試咪。好。反方中文大學逸夫書院辯論隊。試咪。OK， 好。咁我哋事不宜遲，即刻開始啦嚇。每一隊呢，其實個別都有3分鐘發言嘅。咁再提一提大家，計時完呢，仲有顯示仲有30秒剩餘時間嘅時候呢，我會響一下鐘聲。然之後呢，係冇緩衝時間嘅，咁所以到3分鐘嘅時候呢，我會即時停止你哋發言㗎啦。雙方各位同學清楚未？好，發言次序清楚未？好，咁我哋再次歡迎大家嚟到白銀基金大學社創辯論杯。咁今日呢，我哋嘅辯題係社會企業係資本主義全球化之下嘅出路。咁而家呢，我哋首先有請正方主辯同我哋發言。預備好請點頭示意。
試咪。主席、有方同學、在座各位，社會企業嘅發展可以追溯到70年代，源於一位孟加拉嘅教授喺家鄉成立微型嘅貸款銀行，資助當地窮人，提升佢哋嘅生存同埋創業嘅能力。社企發展時至今日，所關注嘅經濟議題逐漸趨向全球性，而其中最爭議嘅就係全球經濟喺資本主義道路產生嘅惡果。 資本主義全球化講嘅係國與國之間大企業甚至係跨國企業更緊密咁連結，進行利潤最大化嘅生產模式，無可避免咁壓榨或者係剝削咗發展中國家嘅農工民，甚至產生咗國與國之間嘅兩極貧富分化，產生政治層面嘅衝突。此外，全球化嘅生產模式會集中咗喺生產成本較低嘅國家，造成咗好大嚴重嘅環境污染。我方認為今日辯論嘅準則就係社會企業對全球化資本主義嘅發展能唔能夠達到可持續嘅發展，而社會企業能唔能夠有效解決我哋全球化資本主義帶嚟嘅惡果，亦都同時係可以達到可持續嘅發展㗎。首先，社會企業能夠解決咗貧富懸殊。現時跨國企業喺生產過程之中，為咗壓低佢哋嘅生產成本，會選擇咗喺發展中國家設廠或者採購佢哋嘅原材料。但係呢啲發展中國家缺乏咗對農工民足夠嘅保障，令到企業係能夠以極低廉嘅價錢去對呢批生活喺金字塔底端嘅市民進行咗剝削。社會企業嘅生產過程之中就會避免呢種嘅情況嘅發生，佢哋會公平咁樣分配佢哋嘅利潤，令到發展中國家嘅農工民得到合乎佢哋尊嚴應得嘅酬勞，從而能夠佢哋可以有更多資源投入教育，得到公平競爭嘅機會，達到經濟導向嘅可持續發展。另外，社會企業亦都能夠幫助舒緩呢個環境嘅問題。由於現時資本主義制度之下嘅企業呢係追求最大嘅生產水平，容易忽略咗生產過程之中為環境帶嚟嘅影響，例如能源及資源。
你講咗2分鐘㗎啦，咁我哋反方係咪有1分鐘嘅質詢嘅？根據規則。唔係。OK， 唔好意思，對唔住，請繼續。
例如能源同資源嘅過度開發對環境嘅過度排污，唔少社會企業正正打住個環保嘅意念，提倡使用環保嘅生產方法，而收入亦都會投放返喺環保嘅產業。此舉不單只可以為環保出力，更可以提升咗市民對環保嘅意識，達到環境導向嘅可持續發展。最後，社會企業嘅湧現亦都會令到市場嘅產業更多元化。資本主義制度之下嘅生產模式之中，令到各大企業超生產利潤高嘅產品，同時排擠咗利潤較低嘅小型創意工業，產業單一。可惜嘅係，呢啲小型產業其實有一定嘅文化價值。社企模式發展成熟嘅話，就會擴大咗呢啲小型創意產業發展嘅空間，有利多元發展，達到社會導向嘅可持續發展。基於以上嘅原因，我方認為今日辯題定必成立。而最後想請問有方同學。
時間夠啦，正方同學。好，現在輪到反方主辯發言3分鐘。
是咪？主席、評判、在座各位，聽完啱啱有方主辯同學講完之後，有方同學淨係覺得社會企業幫助之下可能會有啲問題會得到補救，但係今日我方依然見到喺全球好多嘅國家都飽受住資本主義全球化嘅剝削。可見，即使發展好多年嘅社會企業，都並唔能夠好根本性去解決而家嘅問題。現時全球喺資本主義帶動之下，好多企業都能夠透過市場經濟嘅靈活同埋自由，喺全球進行投資，將一啲高成本嘅生產作業轉移到低成本嘅地區，以賺取最大嘅利潤，逐漸形成聯繫多國嘅跨國企業。而且由於呢啲跨國企業可以利用各地區優勢累積龐大嘅財富，好似例如而家8大經濟體裏面有92個先至係國家，其他全部都係跨國企業，所以跨國企業係可以達到富可敵國嘅實力。而喺呢個情況之下，就存在住2大嘅問題。第一，跨國企業可以無節制咁開發天然資源，破壞環境。由於跨國企業希望賺取更大嘅利潤，除咗砍伐樹木之外，更加會節省處理廢料嘅成本，污染自然環境。例如美國雀巢公司就曾經試過喺美國北加州胡亂排放污水，導致當地嘅食水同埋海洋生物受到破壞。第二，跨國企業左右住國家嘅施政，削弱國家嘅行政主權。現時跨國企業嘅資產富可敵國，例如蘋果、星巴克呢啲咁嘅跨國企業，每年繳交嘅稅項係好少，令到各國嘅政府損失數以10億計嘅美金收入。甚至喺中國有45家嘅跨國企業未向當地工人支付加班嘅工資，更加有23家嘅工廠嘅薪酬加幅係低於法定嘅下限，而今日政府係無力作出控訴。而我方 訂立出路嘅準則，在於社會企業能否協助國家強大抗衡跨國企業嘅勢力。但係現時喺社會企業嘅制度之下，就存在住兩大嘅因素，未能解決以上嘅問題。第一，社會企業嘅影響力有限，無力抗衡跨國企業嘅勢力。由於社會企業嘅利潤主要唔係分俾股東，好多國家嘅法律甚至嚴格咁限制社企股東嘅分紅，只可以得到總利潤嘅30%，難以吸納到大額嘅投資，所以資金嘅累積係十分之有限。社會企業根本就唔足以發展到可以同跨國企業抗衡嘅規模，所以跨國企業依然可以繼續去壓榨國家嘅利益。而第二，社會企業唔能夠阻止跨國企業破壞自然生態。由於跨國企業對於一個國家嘅影響力係非常之大，甚至係凌駕於國家嘅權力，所以連國家法律都唔能夠限制到跨國企業呢啲不法嘅行徑嗰陣時，即使社會企業為自然環境作出幾多嘅補救嘅措施，都唔能夠防止跨國企業繼續破壞我哋自然嘅生態。
時間夠啦，
多謝各位。
好，輪到正方負辯回應。唔該，香港大學嘅負辯。
嗱，仲有各位大家好啦。頭先咧有方同學咧都幫我哋陳述咗好多咧呢個資本主義之下嘅一啲壞處啦，可以再講多啲。譬如講緊農民剝削咁樣啦，究竟有幾剝削呢？嗱，我哋見到咧非洲咧有一個地方咧叫做伊撒亞比，嗰度咧係一個盛產咖啡豆嘅地方啦。咁有120萬嘅咖啡農喎，但係佢哋賣每1公斤嘅咖啡豆咧，佢哋攞到幾多錢呢？大概係3蚊嘅港元，而每一日咧佢哋嘅薪金咧只係有大概7蚊嘅港幣啫。但係想問下呢1公斤嘅咖啡豆去到市場嘅時候，賣緊幾多錢呢？係可以賣到1400蚊港元。我哋見到咧農民剝削係幾咁嚴重，亦都見到咧呢個資本主義究竟對我哋呢一個社會造成咩影響啦？咁有方同學咧就同我哋講啦，今日咧其實我哋社會企業咧就幫唔到我哋嘅。點解？因為佢話嘅準則咧協助唔到國家強大，亦都咧冇辦法咧抗衡到呢一個資本嘅企業啦。咁但係有方同學咧其實今日咧仍然都係處於呢一個資本主義嘅思想之下咧去作出呢一個論點嘅。點解咁講呢？因為其實社會企業所講嘅咧，佢唔係要同呢一啲資本嘅企業去相爭、去爭、互相競爭去攞更多嘅錢啦。佢哋做嘅係對於呢個社會有影響。嗱，其實呢，有方同學話呢，我哋嘅社會企業咧做唔到影響啦，其實唔係嘅。嗱，我講一個非常成功嘅例子啦。英國呢，有其中一間社企咧叫做 Cafe Direct， 佢喺2004年嘅時候呢，甚至係上到市啦，籌集到500磅嘅英鎊嘅資金嘅。咁佢成功嘅地方喺邊呢？佢成功嘅地方唔係在於佢賺到幾多錢，而係呢，正正因為佢呢一個嘅首先係佢社企賣點啦，公平賣嘅咖啡豆啦，受到顧客嘅歡迎啦。雖然呢，佢而家嘅經濟狀況即係佢本身自己嘅財務狀況開始下降，但係問題係呢，佢呢一個競爭呢係提升咗成個英國咧好多唔同賣咖啡嘅公司咧，提升咗呢一啲咖啡公司買公平貿易咖啡特有比率上升咗接近50%，50%嘅。咁所以我哋見到呢一個正正就係社會企業嘅目的，佢係改變緊呢個社會嘅一啲狀況。我哋見到呢一個社會企業 Cafe Direct 就係改變緊呢個公平貿易嘅狀況。嗱。咁所以咧，有方同學話咧，今日咧社會企業咧對於呢一個社會影響力冇咧係絕對唔同意嘅。咁另外啦，其實社會企業講緊係咩咧？我哋成日都講做善事，係點樣咧？而家我哋好多時做善事模式就係我哋捐錢，其實即係一個非常之單向嘅一種方式。但係其實我哋成日可能聽到有啲即係你睇電視啊、睇戲又會講講緊一啲投資嘅企業，佢就會喂，我哋唔係開善堂嘅喎咁樣。咁今日我哋社會企業正正就係開善堂同埋做生意嘅一個融合。當你去做善事嘅時候，你去投資緊喺個環境度啦，你投資緊可能幫緊一啲剝削嘅農人嘅時候呢，你同時亦都係得到一啲有質素嘅產品或者服務。呢一個正正就係社會企業嘅精神，而呢一個就係喺資本主義之下，同時可以防止我哋唔同嘅勞工階層或者環境受到剝削嘅一個出路咯。我哋見到嘅係好多成功嘅例子咧，都成功幫到唔同嘅地方嘅人。
時間夠啦，正方同學。
多謝各位。
輪到反方嘅負辯回應咯。
究竟資本主義全球化帶嚟最大嘅問題係啲乜嘢呢？而社企能唔能夠解決到呢個問題呢？相信呢個係今日成場辯論嘅重點。主席、評判、有分同學在座各位，嗱，其實今日有分同學提出咗好多嘅例子，都係想帶出資本主義全球化下有好多嘅弊處。其實呢點今日雙方係冇質疑㗎。但係今日我方同入方最大嘅分歧就係在於我哋睇呢啲弊處嘅時候，社會企業係咪真係有能力去解決呢一啲嘅問題呢？嗱，有分同學今日最大嘅問題係搞唔清楚乜嘢叫嘅社會企業，因為社會企業本質上就係唔會分紅，佢只會用利潤用翻喺社會同埋佢自己營運上面。即使連今日社企民間高峰會嘅調查都同我哋講，8萬至10萬間嘅社會企業都出現融資困難嘅時候，請問有分同學今日社會企業有乜嘢能力去抗衡今日嘅跨國企業呢？嗱，再者啊，今日出路其實唔止一條，但係發展社企唔係一個出路。點解呢？今日有方同學論宏觀，佢睇唔到社會企業解決唔到即係啲污染河流啊，或者啲環境嘅問題，佢只係做咗啲補救。嗱，論微觀，有方同學覺得對勞工係改善咗㗎，但係等陣先，呢啲係咪真係社會企業做到嘅嘢呢？嗱，不如有分同學嚟同我論證下，社會企業之下人工係咪高咗，工作環境係咪好咗，貧窮差距又係咪真係窄咗呢？嗱，其實今日問題係冇解決到㗎，因為我哋見到孟加拉仲有血汗工廠，仲有好多工人被壓榨嘅時候，既然宏觀、微觀、社企都解決唔到嘅時候，有方同學你點樣正立辯題呢？嗱，今日有方同學講到社企好偉大咁㗎，嗱，講翻有方同學最中意嘅剝削同埋失業啦。嗱，有咗社企，有啲人的確有嘢做，但係今日嘅問題係社企根本阻止唔到跨國企業對呢個勞工嘅剝削。嗱，再者，今日資本主義唔係講緊一小撮人嘅生活受到剝削啊，而係今日成個國家都係喺跨國企業之下受到一個好大嘅壓榨。但反之，我哋見到社會企業嘅影響範圍令唔到跨國企業能夠走出呢個剝削嘅令到呢個國家走出呢個剝削嘅時候，而跨國企業踐踏過嘅土地，社會企業能唔能夠挽回翻佢哋原來嘅山水呢？唔可以。今日我哋唔係要幫人咁簡單啊，我哋係要喺資本主義全球化之下為國家尋找一個出路，係要令一個國家面對資本主義全球化嘅時候，能夠有能力喺人民嘅生活質素同埋跨國企業帶嚟嘅利益之間取一個平衡。先不論今日微觀嘅勞工問題，有方解決唔到。今日我哋應該用一個宏觀嘅角度去睇，但係有方都係解決唔到。其實今日我哋雙方都係想為民嘅，但今日有方同學睇問題睇得太細，睇唔清個大環境。當跨國企業已經令到可以左右國家經濟命脈，可以逃稅、可以施壓嘅時候，社會企業係咪真係解決到呢啲問題呢？嗱，由此可見，依靠社會企業絕對唔係一個資本主義全球化下嘅出路。今日雙方都想為民。但係今日我方更加想人民唔再受剝削之餘，能夠享受到一個安居樂業、冇污染嘅家園，有一個主權唔受跨國企業剝削嘅國家。
夠鐘啦，反方負辯。
多謝各位。
好，俾啲掌聲佢哋先啊！我嘅經驗呢，就通常呢頭2個回合咁樣過招呢，就係熱身嘅啫，跟住自由辯論先係即係賣牙啲嘅。咁我哋跟住會有即係雙方各自有3分鐘嘅自由辯論時間啦。咁啊，大家留意住，如果你仲有30秒呢，我會提醒翻大家嘅。咁啊，鐘聲響嘅呢，不如先正方發言。咁啊，留意你一坐低呢，就輪到反方嘅標計時㗎啦嚇。如果答聲嘅話呢，就我會兩邊一齊計時間嘅。頭先你試咗㗎咯喎。
唔係，我驚佢食個咪。
好，你試多次啦。
試咪試咪。
試咪。
好。咁啊，仲使唔使試？好，咁我哋開始㗎啦喎。好，鐘聲響起，正方開始啊。
好，有方同學，其實我哋見到一啲公平貿易嘅，例如咖啡咁樣啦，佢哋唔再剝削農民，農民可以得到更加合理嘅收入，點解唔係解決緊勞工問題呢？
我想問星巴克係咪有繼續去剝削啲農民呢？
我想問今日星巴克係咪社會企業呢？
唔係，就係當你社會企業佢有啊，冇錯，去保障緊啲農民，但係嘅跨國企業佢都依然係做緊佢哋一直嘅剝削行為嘛。原來佢哋根本就冇任何影響嘅時候，點解你覺得係解決到呢？
嗱，有方同學咩叫冇影響先？今日星巴克繼續剝削，但係我哋有公平貿易嘅一啲社企去幫緊呢啲農民嘅時候，點解就唔係一個解決方法呢？頭先亦都講過咧，有例子係講緊呢一啲嘅社企係影響緊成個營商環境，有超過50%嘅咖啡公司咧，亦都開始用呢個公平貿易。咁點解唔係解決緊問題呢？
有分同我講翻清楚啲，嗱，有影響咧，唔代表係解決方法，更加唔代表係出路。嗱，你今日咧，我哋影響咧，其實好多嘢都可以有影響嘅。究竟我哋社會企業嘅做到冇錯係有一定嘅影響，但係係咪成個資本主義全球化嘅出路呢？
點解有方同學今日認為社企一定會失敗呢？
嗱，我唔係認為社企一定會失敗，但係我可以好肯定話俾你聽，社企佢本身有住佢哋自己嘅限制，佢哋根本冇能力去影響到跨國企業嘅行為。不如你話俾我聽，呢啲而家啲企業佢點社會企業佢點樣可以令到啲跨國企業唔再剝削農民啊或者員工呢？
嗱，今日咧我哋見到咧有方同學咧，其實諗法好黑暗嘅。佢咧覺得咧所有生意人都一定係賺錢嘅，一定為咗分紅嘅，佢哋唔會為社會着想嘅。但係所有生意人係咪真係咁樣咧？請有方同學可唔可以論證一下呢？
嗱，有方同學，你哋自己同我哋講係資本主義係利潤最大化，所以跨國企業係有剝削嘅情況出現，係你哋自己講嘅。咁所以其實你哋已經講唔通咧，究竟點解社企佢哋冇錯，佢哋自己做緊好事，但係佢哋點樣可以令到跨國企業都聽佢哋話呢？如果跨國企業唔聽佢哋話嘅話，究竟個出路去咗邊度呢？
嗱，其實有方同學，我哋今日講緊社會企業咧，係一個整體環境嘅改變。點解有冇諗過有呢個跨國社會企業嘅出現呢？
有方同學，首先會唔會真係有跨國嘅社會企業出現先？嗱，我哋知道其實當呢個社會企業佢哋本身呢，佢哋係有佢哋嘅限制，限制係咩？就係佢哋嘅利潤係唔可以分俾但係好多時候唔可以分俾股東嘛。咁既然係咁，佢哋投資者嘅意欲係咪少咗嘅時候，佢哋資金係咪少咗？環境成本同埋勞工成本都高嘅時候，咁佢哋點樣可以做到個跨國嘅社會企業呢？更加何況嘅就係而家跨國企業有幾多間？你知唔知？
嗱，我哋再次見到咧，有方同學咧，佢嘅諗法咧，都係咧覺得生意人一定係為咗賺錢嘅，完全唔顧社會嘅。我哋今日明明就見到好多生意人、好多社企咧，其實係為社會着想去做生意嘅。佢除咗賺錢之餘，佢係回饋翻社會嘅。呢一啲社會呢啲嘅社企咧，佢同樣利用呢個資本主義嘅優勢咧，去建立佢哋嘅自己品牌，同樣可以有出路咯。
其實有方覺得最大嘅問題就係在於佢根本唔知道乜嘢叫做社會企業啊！社會企業本身就唔會分紅嘅時候，佢將佢利潤用翻喺社會佢自己嘅營運上面。今日民間高府同我哋講，有好多社企都出現融資困難嘅時候，嗱，點解做到跨國企業呢？
有方同學，其實社會企業我哋知道佢唔會分紅俾股東嘅，但係佢將賺到嚟嘅錢呢，其實佢嘅諗法同一般嘅商業一樣，佢要賺最大嘅錢。但係佢嘅錢愛嚟做咩？佢唔係愛嚟分俾佢嘅股東，佢係愛嚟投資喺環境社會上面，而唔係只係將所有嘅資源集中喺一部分人身上，而係將呢啲社會公平咁樣分配喺社會唔同有需要嘅人身上。所以今日社會企業先至係呢個出路咯。
有方同學，咁不如你同我論證下點解依家呢個孟加拉仲有咁多血汗工廠，點解咁多第三世界國家人仲有呢個剝削嘅問題呢？如果
方同學，今日社會企業咧唔係一個仙丹嚟㗎，唔係有社會企業咧所有問題就會解決。但係我哋見到呢一啲問題，正正就係呢啲社會企業開始崛起嘅時候，呢啲問題開始有解決有改善啊嘛。
多謝有方學，你哋承認咗原來社會企業咧係而家係一直都解決唔到問題。喺過去同現在咧，佢已經講唔過去啦。佢同佢講唔係㗎，將來社會企業可能會發展得好好，咁所以咧我哋就已經可以解決到。嗱，我哋而家唔係話社會企業會發展得唔好啊，係社會企業有佢哋嘅定位，有佢哋嘅限制嘅時候，佢哋無力同跨國企業競爭啊。我哋而家話社會企業可以有佢哋嘅發展，但係跨國企業依然有佢哋嘅剝削。你哋亦都同意係咪解決唔到跨國企業嘅剝削問題？
嗱，有方同學諗法好得意啊！佢覺得咧一個方法咧，如果咧行第一步嗰陣時咧有少少阻滯咧，就要即刻停止啦。佢咧明明見到咧，我哋而家社企咧係對呢個社會咧問題咧係有所改善嘅時候咧，但係咧佢覺得我見到有少少負面啦。其實邊一個政策冇負面影響咧？想問有方同學。
對唔住啊，方同學，今日咧我哋唔係覺得佢哋有解決到個問題嘅，因為我哋而家見到即使係社企喺度救緊人都好，但原來你要救嘅人係越嚟越多嘛，你根本阻止唔到啲跨國企業剝削人嘅話，咁我究竟問題解決咗喺邊度呢？
有方同學，咁今日我哋社企就係救緊部分嘅人嘛，我哋救唔晒全部人嘅，咁嗰啲人係咪唔夠先？有方同學。
有方同學，我完全見唔到，我哋今日唔係唔救人啊，只不過係你救唔到咁多人嘅時候，我哋見到你過去做咗40幾年啦，好似有方同學你講啊，社會企業做咗40幾年，我哋見到一啲改善都冇嘅時候，我哋究竟過去、現在、未來係咪真係解決到呢個問題呢？
反方仲有3秒，反方仲有3秒，正方繼續。
嗱，有方同學話俾你聽咧，呢啲社會企業點樣幫助全世界人啊？頭先有講咗咖啡豆提升咗整個營商環境，用緊50%嘅公平貿易咖啡豆啦。我哋英國有一啲做交通嘅一啲社會企業啦，佢每一日咧幫緊數以千萬計嘅人，去令到佢哋可以生活有方便啦。我哋喺柬埔寨亦都有人咧係開緊一啲美容嘅沙龍店啦，佢哋係幫緊一啲咧受販賣嘅人口咧去得到知識同埋改善佢哋生活。咁呢啲唔係解決係乜嘢呢？點解有方同學堅持社會企業係幫助唔到呢啲人呢？
今日我哋見到而家世界銀行嘅數據講過話30年嚟有1億嘅貧窮人口增長，呢啲問題根本就依然存在住。有方同學，你係咪覺得而家淨係一小部分嘅人救到佢哋就係一個出路呢？有方同學，
一小部分人呢，我哋都有要救嘅。第二，我哋再講多一次，今日我哋要講嘅係呢個社會企業係一個整體環境嘅改變。今日如果我哋所有嘅資本企業呢，全部都係用呢個 模式去營運嘅話呢，我哋自然就會得到改善。佢哋唔再剝削，佢哋用同一樣嘅營運模式，自然令到社會問題得以改善咯。
嗱，咁有方嘅邏輯好簡單，佢覺得咧，原來我救得少少人咧，就係資本主義全球化嘅出路。咁我想問而家啲慈善組織啊、一啲綜援啊等呢啲，佢哋都有救到人嘅喎。咁我想問佢哋又係咪資本主義全球化嘅出路呢？
你仲有5秒。
因為社會企業係可持續嘅發展，佢嘅資金係自給自足嘅，而呢一啲慈善機構呢，係
剩翻夠鐘，反方都係剩翻6秒啫。
哦，原來就方同學今日都講唔過去點解社企係可以解決到所有嘅問題。多謝。
好，咁啊，咁先係辯論㗎嘛，大家俾啲掌聲佢哋。同埋其實啲掌聲要俾即時傳譯嘅，我都諗緊佢頭先點譯。OK，我哋而家呢就輪到台下發問嘅環節，咁所以呢，我哋就好似人哋出邊啲論壇咁樣呢 town hall meetings 咁樣呢，就可以大家隨便舉手發言，我亦都唔會好似校際辯論賽咁呢，一定係3條題目問正方啊，3條題目問反方嘅。有大家可以全部問晒一遍，咁都唔係我決定啊，係咪？你自由舉手嘅啫，係嘛？頭先反方有咩問題啊？係頭先反方問有咩問題啊？係 OK 係嘛？冇問題係嘛 ？OK 好邊位有問題？有問題？你好啊有冇其他人有問題？可唔可以舉一舉手？我想一次過睇晒有邊啲人有問題問雙方嘅同學。我可以諗處理4條問題啦。1、2、3，可唔可以舉一舉手？嗰邊有3個。有 floor speaker 嗰度係嘛？好啊，咁啊嗰3位跟住呢位同學一齊上台啊！用上 podium 啦，上 podium 啦。雖然叫 floor speaker。3位同學先啦，3位同學先嚇。好，你叫咩名啊？
係試咪，係我叫。
哇！你咁錯嘅，台下發問唔使咁錯啦。你叫咩名啊？
係我叫鄧坤豪，我係代表和富領袖網絡嘅。
好啊。
係。
你可以發言㗎啦。
OK。
喂，咪住先，咪先。你而家係讀緊咩幾年班嘅？
我係 Year One 嘅。
你 Year One，但係你係 CU 定 Hong Kong U？
我兩邊都唔係嘅。
兩邊都唔係嘅。OK，咁可以。
係啦。
你問正方人反方？
我會問反方。
你問反方，好啦。咁你有1分鐘時間問。
OK，係。主席、評判在各位咁多位大家好。咁有方同學咧，反方同學咧好悲觀，又好矛盾。佢悲觀咧覺得話我哋咧今日社會面對我哋嘅國際企業，我哋做唔到嘢。我哋咧社會企業咧冇能力做。但又好矛盾咧，覺得話其實咧社會企業唔係做唔到㗎，但做得唔夠多。咁我想問在座各位，既然我哋今日做得唔夠多，但我哋做到嘢嘅時候，點解我哋唔嘗試下繼續去做多啲呢？我哋個餅做咗出嚟啦，咁點解我哋唔可以繼續去嘗試努力去將個餅做大佢，嘗試喺我哋嘅資本主義之下走出一條生路呢？多謝各位。
用唔晒1分鐘啊！反方使唔使？反方同學，請問你邊位會回應？係，你可以喺 podium 回應或者企喺度回應都得。你有1分鐘回應嘅。
係，在座各位嗱，搞清楚個問題先。我哋今日唔係唔要社企，我哋都認同社企係好㗎。但係只不過我哋今日見到社企佢本質上已經存在緊一個限制去發展嘅一個原因，就因為佢本質上唔會分紅啊嘛，同埋佢唔會分紅呢樣嘢就會令到好多人就會有興趣去投資落去嘅時候，咁點樣可以做大個餅呢？當然我哋見到社企真係救到好多人啦，咁但係我哋係咪能夠將呢個咁好嘅事業去令到佢能夠有能力去抗衡呢個跨國企業嘅剝削呢？我哋見到唔可以，所以今日辯題絕不成立。多謝各位。
用唔晒1分鐘啊！唔該晒。好，我想睇下咧，如果都係上台嘅都係大學生咧，可能你哋都需要declare 下自己係咪讀港大或者中大嚇。咁第2位上嚟啦，係介紹下自己。
我叫劉建宇啦，咁我都係港大，不過太空人嚟嘅。咁都係讀
呢句唔識喎，真係 out 咗添。點解啊
？Spaceman 啊嘛。
哦。
Space 係咯。
你將佢變咗條英文，大家就明㗎啦。
Space。OK， 呢個香港啲有趣啲嘅啲俗稱係啦。
你問正方人反方咧？
問中大啦，梗係我哋港大人嚟㗎嘛。
咁好唔公平㗎喎！我係咪要 disqualify 你？
咁啊，你揾個中大人出嚟啦。
有冇？我揾個中大人出嚟㗎喎，真係。
咁啊，
好啊。揾個。其實我哋唔緊
唔係，咁我都為咗公平起見揾個中大人出嚟問一問問題啊！你問呢邊啊嘛，唔係，但係中大都問你咁點啊？到時唔係我講笑啫，好繼續啦。
OK，我個問題就係咧，咁其實咧嗱，依家環顧即係呢個資本主義好邪惡啦，咁即係 so far 佢好似就即係令到好多問題都解決唔到啦。咁社會企業咧就好似一個萌芽出咗嚟啦。咁其實如果我哋捨棄咗社會主義，有啲咩嘢可以代替社會主義而做到呢個即係解決，即係成為呢個資本主義全球化嘅出路咧？咁如果冇一啲更好出路嘅時候，我哋係咪應該退而求其次，就喺社會企業嗰度做咧？咁同埋雖然即係中大嘅同學就講到啦，即係社會企業咧，佢即係有好多缺陷，跟住之後咧個國家咧又好似咧又唔夠資本主義咁啦。咁其實如果國家同社會企業結合嘅話，咁其實再同啲跨國企業合又得唔得咧？即係其實可以諗一啲另外啲方法。即係如果我哋見唔到啲更好嘅方法嘅時候，係咪應該咧用住一啲即係相對都叫仲過得去嘅方法而去解決個問題咧？多謝。
好，都係反方同學，你有1分鐘時間啊！
試咪。主席評判在任多位大家好啦。嗱，其實多謝你嘅問題先。嗱，其實你同我哋講話，我哋係咪唔做社企？點解我哋唔可以退而求其次？可以冇其他出路喎？點解我哋唔做住社企先？嗱，咪住先，我哋講咗好多次，我哋今日唔係唔做社企啊。嗱，今日我哋覺得社企係好嘅，我哋唔代表社企就係成個資本主義全球化即係出路啊嘛。咁係咪一定要係出路我哋先做先？唔係噶嘛。我哋知道社企幫到好多人啊嘛，佢哋而家做到好多唔同嘅改變或者影響，但係呢啲影響根本就唔足以去抗衡一啲嘅跨國嘅企業嘅時候，譬如當你社會企業無論發展得幾好都好，當跨國企業佢會比你發展得更加快，佢嘅規模會擴展得更加快嘅時候，咁究竟點解你會覺得我哋冇其他出路啦，就代表我哋社企就等於資本主義全球化下嘅出路呢？同埋我哋而家我哋將我哋嘅呢個嘅出路，我哋就咁將呢個責任擺咗喺社企，我哋又公唔公平呢？係咪代表呢個我哋你覺得而家資本主義係邪惡嘅，係有問題嘅？咁我哋係咪代表我哋而家咩都唔使做啫？叫社企做啦就得可以呢？多謝。
公平起見，我真係想請中大有冇提floor speaker 可以台下發問啊？好啊，麻煩中大反方同學。你好，你叫咩名啊？
黃子怡。
好，你係咪問正方啊？
係。
好。
問正方。1分鐘時間。係，咁有方同學頭先就講到話，其實真係覺得解決咗影響到一小部分嘅人都叫做係出路啦。咁我想問，其實綜援對於滅貧嚟講呢，都係一個即係都有幫助到人，都係一個安全網嚟嘅喎。咁係咪其實佢都係滅貧嘅一個出路呢？如果咁樣去作類比嘅話，多謝。
正方請回應。
嗱，今日咧我哋咧睇到啦，社企有方同學今日終於承認啦，社企咧其實幫到好多人嘅，有改變嘅，有影響嘅，佢係資本主義下面其中一條出路。頭先咧有方同學咧有問啦，佢係滅貧嗰個綜援係咪其中一條出路？佢都係出路。我哋覺得兩樣嘢都要做。我哋今日見到有方同學咧，其實咧佢好多時候咧圍繞住個錢字，佢咧覺得因為錢咧佢哋會放棄社企，但係我哋社企講嘅係一個理念，我哋講嘅係點樣去改變呢個社會，賺錢只係一個其中一個手段，透過賺錢我哋可以幫到更加多嘅人，影響更大，製造更美好嘅社會。多謝各位。
好，我哋今日其實亦都得到和富社會企業嘅成班年輕領袖嘅幫忙嘅，咁所以等兩條問題都係佢哋嘅代表，咁啊俾啲掌聲和富佢哋啊，多謝。仲有兩條問題，爭取時間啦，介紹下自己啦，你叫咩名？
孫曉南。
你問邊邊呢？
我係問正方同學。
我問正方同學喎，好啊，正方預備咯喎，1分鐘時間。
好，咁在各位大家好啦。咁啱啱咧，其實反方提到佢講出路咧，就係話要根治到呢個全球化資本主義全球化帶嚟嘅問題啦。咁但係啱啱聽正方論證咧，佢似乎就唔能夠舉出喺全球化呢個處境底下有啲咩實際嘅例子，即係佢淨係舉出英國一個間 cafe 嘅例子去論證啦。但喺全球化呢個處境底下，到底一間本地化嘅企業去點樣根治到佢所講跨國企業帶嚟嘅問題呢？所以想請正方論證一下，多謝各位。
正方請回應。
係
在座各位大家好啦，嗱咁樣頭先有方即係啱啱多謝你提問啦，咁你亦都提到呢，即係其實我哋見到英國呢係呢個都算係成功嘅例子，對呢個社會有影響。咁你就問啦，咁喺香港點樣根治呢個問題呢？嗱，其實我哋見到呢，英國呢係嗰啲社會企業呢已經發展咗一段時間㗎啦，但係香港仲係非常之初步嘅階段。咁但係香港嘅社會企業做緊咩呢？佢好根本咁樣改善緊某一啲低下階層嘅生活，佢可能係幫緊一啲基層人士啦，幫緊一啲貧窮人士啦，幫佢哋就業。賦予佢哋一啲技能啦，等佢哋可以有生活啦。呢啲已經係根治緊一啲資本主義帶嚟呢一啲低下階層被剝削、社會流動性偏低嘅一個問題啦。嗱，再講下啦，有方同學咧頭先又話啦，呢啲社會企業咧唔分紅嘅，所以唔吸引啦。但係點解唔吸引呢？頭先都講過啦，英國嗰個 Cafe Direct 咧上市嘅時候咧籌集到400萬資金喎。我哋又睇下啦，頭先我哋睇下英國咧又係關於社企嘅報告啦。從舊年到今年呢，佢哋對於成個英國經濟嘅貢獻呢係有成24萬英鎊嘅，係幾咁多呢？亦都係比2年之前呢，只係2年之間呢已經提升咗7萬英鎊啦。
多謝，
所以係絕對有吸引力嘅。多謝各位。
好，最後一條問題，介紹下自己啦。
我叫余俊昌，都係嚟自和富社會企業。
你問邊邊呢？
我問正方。
OK。
係咁啱啱正方都係咁話到，而家資本主義社會嘅一啲弊處啦，一啲企業往往都係追求盈利最大化嘅。但係咁，我哋而家都見到，除咗社會企業之外，都有其他一啲出路啦，例如一啲例如話推廣corporate social responsibility 嘅咁樣等等啦。咁我哋會見到 Cafe Direct 上市，去令到其他咖啡店去改善 fair trade， 改善其他農民嘅生活。但係呢個只係其中一個例子，我哋亦都有好多其他嘅例子，例如話蘋果向富士康施壓去改善員工嘅福利。咁樣我哋可以見到之下，蘋果嘅壓力係嚟自一啲 interest group 啊，或者一啲壓力團體。同時亦都可能嚟自一啲消費者嘅壓力，我哋可以往往見到錢嘅驅動力係比其他係大嘅。咁當我哋啱反方都講到其他一啲社會企業根本做唔到一啲競爭嗰陣，又如何影響一啲企業去改善佢哋一啲對 social value 對一啲環境啊，或者一啲 fair trade 嘅一啲待遇呢？
好，正方。正方同學。
其實咧，我哋頭先咧啱啱睇到條問題咧，好簡單嘅。佢個重點係點咧？佢就係話咧，因為咧社企咧佢唔係一盤生意，但係其實呢一點正正係錯。社企佢本身都係一盤生意，佢都係要賺錢嘅，但係賺錢只係佢其中一個手段，佢最終嘅目的係幫助呢個社會。我哋今日見到社企咧，其實呢一個理念咧，其實係成功係可行嘅。佢係有效果㗎。咁咧，我哋見到佢係淨係一步一步咁樣咧踏出呢個資本主義全球化下造成嘅陰霾，咁點解佢唔係一個出路咧？係咪一步登天嘅政策嘅生意先至可以叫出路呢？點解唔可以逐步逐步行呢？多謝各位。
好，我哋而家俾1分鐘時間雙方嘅結辯預備下啦。咁喺呢段時間都同大家講講呢，其實我哋就有一個手機 Apps 咧，可以俾大家投票嘅。麻煩阿 Eva 走去介紹多一次啊。咁如果大家未下載嘅話呢，可以而家下載嘅。You may download. We are using a mobile app for voting, so please download from the website, or if you have a QR code reader. If you have the QR code reader, you can just read the QR code behind me, or you can type bit.ly. It's not the one, it's an L. bit.ly/SES must be all uppercase. 2013. 你入 bit 點ly/SES2013，咁可以即刻用個手機 Apps 投票噶啦。好啦，咁另外俾大家睇一睇，如果你入咗去嘅時候呢，可以撳Discover Events 個藍色掣啦。係啦，然之後呢，就再入去啦，揾到我哋嗰個辯論比賽，認住我哋個 logo 得噶啦。撳咗入去呢，就有2隊嘅。We have the 2 teams name in Chinese, but the upper button represent Chinese University on your left-hand side, and the lower button represent the affirmative, which is Hong Kong University on your right-hand side. All right, 1 minute is up. Let's hear the concluding remarks from both sides. We'll start with the negative. 中大嘅結辯預備好未？
試咪。 主席、評判、入方學在座各位大家好。社會企業係資本主義全球化下嘅出路。其實我哋要審視呢條辯題呢，我哋要留意辯題裏面3個非常之重要嘅字眼。第一就係社會企業。其實我好慶幸呢，正反雙方今日呢都達到一個共識，就係社企係好嘅，社企有佢嘅好嘅社會目的。但係就代唔代表今日嘅辯題就即刻成立呢？第二個就係資本主義全球化啦。我哋都同意喺資本主義下呢，即係講緊利潤最大化嘅呢個邏輯。而我哋今日對嘅問題都有共識㗎。我哋都認為跨國企業呢，採雄勢大刀，可以壓榨、剝削工人，藐視一個地方嘅法律，干預一個國家嘅政策，甚至係破壞呢個世界嘅環境。到第三啦，就係出路啦，亦都係我哋今日嘅分歧所在。今日有方同我哋講話出路呢，就係有影響就係出路啦。其實好多嘢都係有影響㗎。咁係咪每一樣嘢擺落呢條辯題裏邊都成立呢？其實出路係講緊一條可以帶我哋走出現時困境嘅路嘛，所以應該係解決方法。然而我哋今日見到社企根本就係解決唔到問題，無論係正方同埋反方講嘅問題都解決唔到啊！有方同我哋講話社企好好，佢唔會壓榨工人，又會俾工作機會佢哋。我知，但係呢啲只不過係補救，唔係解決。因為我哋見到社企出現咗幾十年啦，原來跨企去壓榨工人嘅問題等等依然存在，亦都冇改善過。有方同我講話改善到貧富懸殊，但我哋見到原來貧窮人口係30幾年嚟依然係多咗1.03億。你有你保障，佢有佢繼續壓榨，冇錯。社企的而且確做咗好多嘢去改善個環境，去救呢個地球。但原來你有你救，佢有佢破壞。所以其實有方同學都知道啦，喺過去、現在社企可以做嘅嘢真係非常之有限，就同我哋講未來啦。但有方同學假設就係社企嘅發展會越嚟越多，遲之後會多到咧可以影響咗或者制衡咗呢啲跨國企業。有方同學顯然係忘記咗，其實社企本身有最大嘅局限。社企雖然都係一盤生意，但係佢哋對投資者嘅吸引力始終有限。有方同學講足全場嘅 Cafe Direct， 佢話上市講清楚啲先。其實呢個上市同我哋普通嘅理解嘅上市係唔同㗎，佢係一個一次性嘅集資，係幾間社企聯埋一齊嘅一件事一個集資項目嚟㗎。佢嘅集資嘅資金始終都係有限，更何況嘅係原來當我哋其他企業佢可以俾一啲不合理地低嘅水平，佢哋為咗慳錢可以唔適當咁樣處理一啲廢物嘅污水嘅時候，社企其實嘅勞動成本同埋環境成本都會較佢哋高。所以殘忍嘅事實就係嗰啲社企嗰啲企業佢慳落嚟嘅錢就可以令到企業嘅資金越嚟越大，規模越嚟越多。其實喺呢場比賽裏邊呢，唔係因為社企跑得唔夠落力，就係因為跨企從一開始佢哋就有最靚嘅跑鞋、偷步起跑、食禁藥。社企跑緊嘅係障礙賽，但係跨企跑緊嘅係直路。所以無論社企跑得幾落力都好，跨企同佢嘅差距依然係會越嚟越大。我哋見到今日有方同學同我哋講話，我哋幫緊社企打氣，但係只不過一路飲住星巴克、可口可樂，一路用蘋果電腦幫佢哋打氣，將責任放晒喺佢哋身上。所以其實係唔足夠嘅。多謝。
好，正方結辯，有3分鐘時間。
在各位大家好，可以喺會展呢度呢，對住咁多人打辯論呢，對我嚟講呢，就好似喺電視上面先會出現嘅畫面一樣。講起電視呢，我尋日就悶悶地喎，想打發下時間，咁就打開電視嚟睇啦。但係撳嚟撳去呢，都係得翡翠台、本港台，連一個有趣啲嘅節目都揾唔到。原來呢，面對住着住幾寸高踭鞋查案嘅女警，淨係中意溝機師嘅空姐，亂開抗生素嘅醫生，或者係播完又翻播嘅內地節目呢，我哋完全冇得揀。原因係點解呢？係因為香港嘅電視業呢，俾2間大公司壟斷咗。無線亞視呢，影響嘅呢，可能只係本地嘅其中一個行業，但係我哋今日呢，見到資本主義導致問題，隨住資本主義全球化呢，影響嘅係全世界。試想像我哋今日咧買一件名牌衫，可能咧要幾百蚊，但係呢件衫咧所用嘅原材料係由發展中國家農民辛辛苦苦種出嚟嘅棉花，之後咧再送去另外一個國家，用廉價嘅勞工大量生產。因為製造商、分銷商、零售商中間嘅剝削咧，雖然今日一件名牌衫賣嘅係幾百蚊，但係咧原來嗰啲錢咧全部俾大企業、大公司賺盡，低下嘅階層咧，農工民咧用盡勞力1個月嘅汗水換嚟嘅只係幾個銅板。因為資本主義嘅全球化，我哋見到國家之間貧富差距越嚟越大。我哋今日見到有方同學咧諗法其實好黑暗㗎，佢哋講到咧呢全世界嘅人咧都係一個錢字嘅啫，為咗分紅、為咗賺錢，佢哋先會做生意。但係我哋所以咧，社企就一定失敗，但係事實係咪咁呢？社企講嘅係一個理念，佢係講除咗賺錢之餘， 點樣再去改變社會。我哋今日見到啦，政府、非政府機構、慈善組織咧，努力咗好多年，嘗試去解決社會上種種嘅問題，但係成效都好低。原因咧喺呢個經濟掛帥嘅世界入邊咧，擁有話事權係全球佔不足1%嘅人，佢哋通過大企業咧去獲得巨額利益，而社會企業正正就係利用翻資本主義喺取得利潤之後，再將資源恰當咁分翻俾有需要嘅人。解鈴還須繫鈴人，資本主義所造成嘅問題呢，我哋今日見到可以用翻資本主義去解決佢。我哋今日見到資本主義喺全球化底下呢，獲益嘅係一小撮嘅聰明人，但係我哋日後需要嘅係更加多有良心嘅聰明人。我哋唔想日後呢見到落街嘅時候呢，見到都係一式一樣嘅商鋪入邊賣一式一樣嘅商品。我哋今日想有得揀，王維基講得好啱，人哋唔道德唔代表我都可以唔道德。假如呢企業家呢都可以多為社會着想，社會一定可以更加持續、更加好咁樣發展落去。多謝各位。
好，麻煩雙方嘅隊伍，不如企起身接受一下大家嘅打氣啦。多謝晒你哋今日上嚟啦。好，咁啊兩隊可以落台㗎啦。咁啊頭先嗰個投票嘅畫面大家如果未下載，可以趁而家下載啊。Next we will come to the Day 2 Keynote session. May I now invite Professor Charles Hampden Turner？ 我哋請我哋今日嘅專題演講嘅第一位嘉賓 Hampden Turner 教授同我哋講下，佢都寫緊一本書啦，係關於資本主義嘅出路嘅其實。咁啊今日會同我哋分享佢呢本將會喺2014年初出嘅書嘅一啲嘅初步諗法。Professor, welcome to Hong Kong, and you're turning 80 years old. Yes, doesn't look like it. All right, 80 years of wisdom. Over to you now, Professor.
My thesis is that the capacity to create wealth is a judicious mixture of enterprise and sociability. You have to have the sociability, and then you have to turn it into enterprise, and it doesn't work unless you have the sociability. Hong Kong is a hinge. It's a hinge between East and West. Along with Singapore, it mingles Chinese and British influences, just as Taiwan and South Korea mingles East Asian and American influences. Between them, these economies are among the strongest in the world, and they are also the mentors of the People's Republic of China. So you occupy, if you look at the World Economic Forum, you'll see that year after year Hong Kong and Singapore is up there, as is Taiwan and as is South Korea. The answer of whether capitalism is capitalism is the worst system except for all the others. That's my take on it. South Korea has increased its wealth by 260 times, and it is 400 times wealthier than North Korea. So we can't live without capitalism. It creates wealth. We have to tame it. We have to do something with it. We have to change it, but we can't live without it. Okay, what happened to China after 1979? Why did the economy suddenly spurt? The answer is actually quite simple. The Chinese diaspora came home. The diaspora added together was the third largest economy in the world. This was in 1979. I repeat, the third largest economy in the world if you add up all the Chinese enclaves across the world and you put them together. And now these islands all over the world had 1.3 billion people to work on. So it's really not surprising that China has spurted ever since. Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore invested 8 times more in the People's Republic of China than did the USA. The traditional culture of China also returned together with the ethic of the family and the social roots in enterprise. So the Confucian ethic came back. As Deng Xiaoping put it, one country, two systems. This takes amazing tolerance when you think that Ronald Reagan couldn't bear Grenada to have a left-wing government, and he invaded a country the size of 2 aircraft carriers. I mean, Americans simply couldn't tolerate a dissenting voice in their hemisphere. It wasn't even in America. but the fact that the Chinese are able to think of two systems. And my thesis is that the synthesis of East and West is a very powerful combination. My company's been doing cross-cultural research for 26 years. During this time, we've made 3 crucial findings. Let me say, with all the humility for which I am renowned, that they could be of world-changing importance. Our first finding, that is, Anglo-American values are the mirror image of Chinese values. We in the West believe in exactly the same values as you do, but there is a snag. The order of priority is reversed. We put enterprise before sociability. You are increasingly putting sociability before enterprise. Witness this conference. Here is that mirror. UNPA stands for universalism versus particularism. That's one universal law versus particular exceptions. IN is individualism, CO is communitarianism. SP is specific analysis, and DI is diffuse, holistic ways of thinking. And if you hold that up to the mirror, they are reversed. Unfortunately, they turn into looking glass writing, which is a bit difficult to read. But you can see that PA has changed places with UN, that community has changed places with individualism, and diffuse has changed places with specific. So exactly the same values, but in a different sequence. You'd think that would make everyone very happy. Well, not quite. Oh dear. Does it matter whether we put laws ahead of exceptions or exceptions ahead of laws? Individuals ahead of organizations and communities, or the latter before individuals? It matters a great deal. But even the most important thing is the ability to see that both are true at the same time. In other words, it's true that laws are improved by exceptions, and it is also true that exceptions lay the foundation for a new law. So you can put them in either sequence, but the sequences are very, very important, and they make all the difference. This is what Adam Smith taught us. By serving customers well and using resources effectively, I gain custom which bestows on me more resources to manage even better. So we've got Adam Smith's famous baker making sweetmeats for people to eat, and this increases. But notice that wealth is created by indirection. The sin is not making a profit. The sin is thinking only of profit. That's the problem. It's like the pursuit of happiness. You don't overrun and capture happiness. Happiness, think of other people, think of something else, think of social enterprise, and happiness will ambush you on the way. So all the best values in the world are gained by indirection, not by seizing them. I don't know. Keeps jumping. Okay. What is most important is to see both. Here is the invisible hand. Adam Smith, having had this brilliant insight, then completely messed it all up. And he said there was an invisible hand, fierce and successful competition between businesses in serving customers assures us that society as a whole reaps the benefit, albeit accidentally. Okay? And so he said, don't bother about other people. If you compete, then public service will look after itself. And that's palpably untrue. And what we have in East Asia is two visible hands, and that's the Confucian ethic, close, caring, trusting relationships within a family and a community network ensures that individuals will benefit and grow profitable. So once again, you've got the Taoist yin-yang, and you've got wealth created by indirection. But the West does not see this. How dare they turn our values ass to face? It's all extremely sinister. The word sinister is interesting because it has two meanings. The original meaning of sinister is left-handed. A boxer who uses his left hand is sinister. But from switching from right to left, we get the second meaning of the word, which is vaguely menacing and threatening. So how dare this person use his left hand and not his right hand? So reversing the order in which we think threatens people and frightens people. Our second finding is that all cultures betray themselves when they take their dominant values too far. We witnessed this in the great cultural revolution in China, when the ideal of harmony and consensus was taken to an extreme and crushed individuality. One of the few things Confucius and Lao Tzu agreed on was that extremes turn into their opposites. So very important insights. I repeat, extremes turn into their opposites. And this happens in the West as well, where the ideal of the dauntless, free, unregulated self-interest has been taken too far and has wiped out literally trillions in the financial crisis. Hong Kong's ability is to reconcile opposites by the ancient folk wisdom of the Tao of yin and yang. This has preserved the balance. You have, I think, and Singapore too, has preserved a balance between the logics of East and West. Our third major finding is that nothing works better than East-West hybrid. I believe that wealth is created by resolving paradoxes, and that Chinese culture has a tolerance for paradox not found anywhere else in the world. We in the West see sociability as something polarized with enterprise. We just had a debate on a few minutes ago, and basically on the British notion that if you shout at each other and things like that, there will be a winner and you will vote for one side or the other. It doesn't seem to occur to people that the truth is nearly always somewhere in the middle. The West is wedded to dichotomies and to adversaries. So we have enterprise and we have sociability. They're like knights in armor charging towards each other on the list. It's very spectacular. It's very entertaining. If like Vincent Wong, you're doing radio broadcasting, you get wonderful debates, but you sometimes wake up in the morning and wonder what the hell you're doing. That there is no reconciliation, there's no fusion, there's no mutual understanding. The Chinese word for dilemma is spear and shield, and that's always interested me. Because while at any one moment of time you have to use either your spear or your shield, so of course it's a dilemma, and nobody in their senses would go into battle without both the spear and the shield. You use them alternately or you use them. So for Chinese people, I think, of Chinese ethnicity, dilemmas are complementarities. While there is a dilemma moment by moment, yes, I've said that, okay. Consider rules and exceptions. We have a well-known dilemma which 1/3 of a million managers have answered. And please consider how you would reply. You are a passenger in a car with your best friend who, while breaking the speed limit, hits and injures a pedestrian. You are the sole witness. You can save him by testifying he was not speeding. What you say in the witness box. And this is a contest between love, the love of your friend, and the truth, speaking the truth in a court of law. And here are with Switzerland at the top and South Korea at the bottom. The top 10 nations are all Protestant. The middle 10 nations are nearly all Roman Catholic, and the bottom 10 nations are nearly all Confucian, and or they're also Russian Orthodox. So we have lawful truth-telling versus loving and exceptional person. Okay. So who is the villain of this scene? It's very easy to moralize, very easy to say of Chinese or Indian people, my God, they'd even lie in a court of law. What's going to happen to our legal system if people do that? It's very easy to say, my God, these English and Americans and these Protestants would even shop their best friend to a stranger. They'd even betray their best friend in front of a court. So So who is the villain of the scene? Well, I'm reminded of the captain of the Exxon Valdez. They came up to him after he'd spilled millions of gallons of crude oil into Anchorage Bay, and they said, what is the problem? And he said, I think you're looking at it. And he was drunk. And I think if you're asking yourself what's wrong with this, you're looking it. I'm the person who's wrong, and I've probably been wrong for 20 or 30 years. The mistake, I think, that social science methodology makes is that we analyze things to pieces. We pull the wings off the butterfly and we kill it. It was Wordsworth who said, our meddling intellect mishapes the beauteous forms of things we murder to dissect. If you take things to pieces, especially if you take values to pieces, then you're going to suffer. Then you're going to create pathology. So we have to get these values together, we have to get them integrated. It isn't profit or non-profit, it's both. We have to reconcile them somehow. We have to make a profit doing good things for people. Let's take, for example, the reconciliation of laws and exceptions. Rules are tested and improved by exceptions. I mean, that's obviously true. It's only the British with the laws of economics that won't admit there are any exceptions. It's efficient market hypothesis, according to some people, has no exceptions, according to Milton Friedman. So rules are tested and improved by exceptions. That makes sense. But the reason I've drawn the sun up there is because this is an Enlightenment doctrine. This is the rational way we think in the West. And notice the sun is shining only on what is above the water. But why shouldn't we reverse it? Why couldn't we turn it upside down? The problem with rationality is that it's linear and it's not circular, and we've got to learn to think in circles. And when we think in rational ways, we repress the opposite. The fact that exceptional people must rise above laws and standards and be different. It contradicts reason. So the opposite statement here is the counter proposition. Exceptions, which can be the origin of new rules, are tested by exceptions. And this is a sentence that goes round forever. This is a circular way of thinking, and I am trying to persuade you that only circular ways of thinking can save us. We are arguing, we are fighting, we're debating, if you like, about two arcs of a circle, and that's a waste of time and a waste of energy. We simply flip left to right and top to bottom. I'm rather proud of this one, because you see laws are flipped over to exceptions, laws are tested by and are the origins of, and simply you turn this left to right and right to left, and two simple movements. And you've managed to switch Western ways of thinking with Eastern ways of thinking. And I'm particularly proud of that economy. Okay? Here is individualism versus societal organizations. In the West, we believe individuals who enrich and express themselves via organizations. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with it. You can't criticize it. It's rational. But what about the opposite proposition? What about something that's equally rational? What about organizations which can nurture and develop individuals? That's what we've been talking about the last 2 days. We've been talking about organizations which can nurture and develop individuals. And unless you see the rational statement in reverse, then you see nothing. And we constantly go from boom to bust because we keep exaggerating one particular rationality. Let's take pay for performance, or is it performance deserving pay? Specific analyses into pieces, numbers, reveal diffuse wholes. Here is pay for performance. You see the little man with the carrot dangling in front of the donkey. Who are we? Are we donkeys? So specific analyses into pieces and numbers reveal diffuse wholes. And in the middle there, I've got financial products. What the hell is a financial product? Finance is a relationship. It's a relationship between people. It's a trustful relationship between people. Chopping it up into lots of little boxes and calling those financial products is the recipe for disaster. The word credit comes from credere, to believe. Okay? You either believe or you don't believe. You either trust the other person or you don't trust the other person. Okay? Diffuse wholes that generate wealth from specific parts. Here is a man conducting an orchestra. Here is, and basically if we put diffuse relationships first, and that's what this conference is also about, it's about putting diffuse relationships first, then we have a whole other take on the process of wealth creation. Okay, let me come to my conclusion. It is first imperative that we think in circles. No two coins rubbing against each other have ever created a third coin or ever will. Banks don't contribute, they distribute. That doesn't mean they're not needed. We need them to distribute money to lots of different people, but they do not contribute, they distribute. And at the end, there is less money than they began with, so they do not create wealth. Hong Kong stands between East and West, speaks English and Mandarin, and etc., and should become a world business educator. I think you're in a wonderful position. In the reconciliation of dilemmas, nations, and cultures lies the secret of creating wealth and of healing mankind and of putting sociability and enterprise together. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Next, may I invite Mr. David Bornstein. He told me he has just finished cutting the turkey on the Thanksgiving night and then jumped on the first flight to Hong Kong. Thank you, David. He arrives at 4:45 this morning.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to Hong Kong again. When was you here last time? 3 years ago? Yeah, almost.
2 or 3.
3 years ago.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, David.
It's wonderful
Over to
to
you.
be. It's wonderful to be here. That was a fantastic talk. You know, just I've been writing about social enterprise, social entrepreneurship for about 23 years now, and it's so exciting to see a debate about social enterprise, because when I first started covering this issue, people didn't even understand what the term was. If you put social and enterprise together, you lost the room. So it's very interesting to see in 20 years how much has changed. And this is not just in Hong Kong or in Brazil or South Africa or Canada or the United States, but pretty much everywhere. You see the idea that you can repurpose business, and people are now inventing many, many different models, and I suspect that we'll continue to see them being invented for the next century. I'd like to talk about my field because, you know, I've been writing about social innovation for 20 years now, but inevitably when I go to a cocktail party and I start talking about the things that I do, people look at me with surprise. They say, well, you know, isn't the world falling apart? Isn't everything just terrible and awful? And I say, oh, you've been reading the newspapers, or you've been watching CNN or the BBC. And there's this enormous gap right now that exists between the world that is being created under the radar and the world that everybody sort of experiences on a daily basis when they tune into the media. This is a pretty good example of the kinds of headlines that you're treated to if you pick up a newspaper or if you pick up your iPad and you tune into the news of the day. And it's very interesting. If you read these headlines every day, you will end up feeling like this. And this is a very interesting sort of disconnect, because it's enormously destructive. Because the way we imagine the world, it determines what we do. Every day we get up and we decide, what are we going to invest our energies in? And our idea of the world, the way the world is mediated to us, ultimately determines where we think we can be effective, whether we should focus on the commons or whether we should focus on the backyard, whether we should try to help society or whether we should try to go out and become as rich as possible and send our own children to private schools. So the implications of a news environment that looks like this is that as human beings we struggle for efficacy. We really try to have a sense of control. So the natural idea when you read the headlines is to think, well, what do we do about any of these problems? And we tend to not think of the news as a feedback system, but in fact that's what it is. It is a feedback system. Parenting is a feedback system. You tell your children how they did today, and hopefully they become better tomorrow. If we compared the news to parenting, it would be like criticizing our children every single morning at breakfast and not saying anything else to them so that they will become better people. It actually would be a crazy feedback system. If you did this as a manager, you would be fired very quickly because all your employees would be depressed and they wouldn't do very well. Now, if we think about social enterprise, and when you think about that debate, the real question behind that debate, with all due respect, is not, is social enterprise able to compete with corporations? The real question is, what do we do with all of these ideas that are emerging at this point in history around the world? Millions of new ideas about how to solve social problems, millions of new kinds of institutions, hybrids, that are trying to figure out how do you square the circle and do a better job with housing, with education, with healthcare, with all of the problems we face. So the question is, what's been missing from our news? Why don't people have a sense of what's going on? And this very much goes back to the idea of the exceptions becoming new rules. Historically, journalism has been conceived as a mechanism that improves society by pointing out shortcomings. The journalist is the watchdog. If you listen to the radio, you will hear criticism, criticism, criticism about the government every day. Very legitimate. You'll hear about the bomb that went off, the pipe that broke on Main Street, the company that defrauded its customers, and so forth. What we've been doing, and since I've been covering this field of social innovation for 20 years, we realize that we really have to change the news business because there's this enormous landscape of innovation that's not being captured, and it's not being brought to people on a daily basis. So we started a network recently called the Solutions Journalism Network, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about it, and then afterwards Vincent and I are going to have a conversation. So just to give you a very simple definition, solutions journalism is a new journalism practice that is beginning to be adopted in various news organizations around the world. And it's very simple. It's just the rigorous, usually as much as possible, data-driven reporting about responses to social problems. So basically, the world is like Newton's law of motion. Every force creates a counterforce. Every problem creates a whole series of responses to that problem. The question is, why do journalists feel that it's their job to cover the problem and ignore the responses? And what does that do to us every day when we hear about the problems, but we never hear about the responses? We end up imagining a false world, a world that is unduly negative, that doesn't have adequate responses. So the purpose of solution journalism is to provide a whole story. It's to tell people what the problems are, what the responses are, so that you can understand how the world is adapting to the current set of challenges. It's a way of delivering the news that makes the problems more clear, because when you understand how people are trying to respond to those problems, you actually understand really what the problem is. It's a way of reporting on issues in society that leads to more constructive debate, less fatalism and less polarization, because when people are discussing responses to problems, they tend to get into how-to questions, not do you agree with questions. It tends to push people more into engineering kind of conversations and away from, for 3 generations, I've been opposed to this idea kind of conversations. And finally, it engages citizens. And we've seen this over and over and over again. So the one thing I want to point out is that when we talk about solutions journalism, we are not talking about the imposters, which you may see now and then. I've given this talk to many, many news organizations, and we always talk about this is not journalism that looks at talking about people, making people heroes because they started a social enterprise. It's not journalism that talks very simplistically about a solution saying this is going to solve the world's problems, like a silver bullet solution. It's not journalism that is fluffy, that's going to go talk about some new social enterprise and say it's going to solve the world's problems, as we've heard in the debate. And finally, it's not policy recommendations. It's not picking winners or saying we should do this. It's just really clear reporting, okay? The reason why we really need to talk about this, and I encourage all of you as news makers perhaps, or as news consumers, to urge your news sources to do this. And I'll tell you why, it's very simple. Journalists are allowed to be as cynical as possible. Nobody will ever punish them. Nobody will ever say, you've been too cynical today, we think you should draw that back. It's perfectly fine. But if they look a little bit naive, it's a crime. They get punished. Professionally, their reputations get hurt. So journalists will always err on the side of being overly cynical and will avoid stories if they're a little bit positive or a little bit instructive. So how are we going to get journalists to move in this direction? Well, for one thing, anybody who consumes news organizations, and every news organization in the world today is looking for more customers because they're all losing money, you have a lot of power today over reshaping the news, and I encourage you to use that power. And also, you have a lot of power in making news, since everybody in this room can also be a publisher tomorrow by just setting up your own news site. So I'll give you a few examples of some solutions journalism that has had really big impact. This is a story that was written in the New York Times by my colleague, Tina Rosenberg. It was written in 2001, and this story changed the world. I'm not exaggerating to say that. This was the first major news article that explained that Brazil was the only country in the world in 2001 that was providing medication for people with AIDS and was doing all the things that all the health authorities had said was impossible. They were providing the medication well, the people were taking it properly, they weren't developing resistant forms of AIDS, and it forced the pharmaceutical companies and the United States government, which was carrying water for the pharmaceutical companies, to acknowledge the fact that it was possible to treat AIDS in the developing world through the same medications that people were getting in the United States. It's had a very, very powerful impact. And the reason why it's so interesting is because my colleague Tina could have written about 100 countries where AIDS was taking an enormous toll on people. She decided to write about the one country that was actually responding creatively and positively to AIDS. Because she did that, she was able to have a much bigger impact on this problem around the world. I write a column in the New York Times called Fixes. This is an indication of a story that I wrote looking at what we can do to improve the culture of medicine in the United States. Because 50% of doctors in the United States say that they wouldn't go into medicine if they had to choose it again. And many, many want to quit. It's a very, very unhappy profession now. There's very high rates of depression, high rates of suicide, all sorts of bad things. Medicine is a really, really unhappy profession. So I wrote an article looking at different ways that people are trying to help doctors in the United States. And the interesting thing about our column, which is called Fixes, we've been doing it in the New York Times for 3 years, we're almost always on the most emailed list. There's very few people who beat us on that list. And we write about malaria, homelessness, medicine, all sorts of difficult issues, and yet these stories get shared over and over, and it has taught us that people actually want to hear news about how you can solve social problems. I'm going to skip this one. We're now doing a very interesting project with the Seattle Times, which is a big newspaper in the United States. It has won, for those of you who follow journalism, it's won 2 of the last 4 Pulitzer Prizes. So it has a lot of credibility. And they're doing a 1-year series now called Education Lab, which we're helping them with, where they're just looking at how to improve education in Seattle. They're not looking, they've covered the problems for years, but they haven't covered the solutions. And the journalists are coming up with so many ideas, both in Seattle and in other parts of the United States, and in some cases other parts of the world, to solve the problems. The journalist who wrote this story, which is about a turnaround in a school in Seattle, said she had never gotten this much of a response in 23 years as a journalist to this story, which showed how one elementary school had solved some of its major problems. So just to conclude, what we are now learning about the human brain, about how behavior changes, how we take in information, is that for people to make behavior change, they need some really clear pieces of information. It's not enough to tell people what's wrong. You can't just warn them. If you warn people too much, they will not solve the problem. They will go and sit on the couch and eat ice cream and try to ignore the problem because that's what we do. When we feel overwhelmed, we either deny or we have all sorts of coping mechanisms, but rolling up our sleeves and solving the problem is often not one of them. So some of the things that people really do need from the behavioral sciences, they need an awareness of what's possible. Some bright spots have to be in their mental maps. They need a sense of pathways. How do you actually do things? And third, they need information that connects to their aspirations, that links to the things that they want to do with their own lives very practically. If we provide information in that form about the social enterprises that we're talking about social entrepreneurship, about governments, about things, and we look at the problems and responses and we create this kind of feedback loop for society, will dramatically accelerate the social innovation, far more than we've seen over the past 20 years. And over the last 20 years, it's been very dramatic. So I want to thank you for your attention, and now we'll have a Q&A with Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you. David, please remain on stage. I would like you to join Professor Hampton Turner. Just a short announcement. I have talked to the split out session for the next 4 sessions. The parallel sessions will be postponed to 10 to 3.我哋會將所有跟住嗰個 session 留翻少少時間 Q&A。咁我哋會14:50，即係2:10開始之後個 session 嘅。咁另外呢，我哋頭先發現都有好多人真係 download 唔到，我哋會同會展反映之餘呢，都想你哋真係可以即係投票。咁綠色呢，就係正方，正方就係頭先左手邊香港大學嘅，白色呢，就係反方。咁如果未攞到白色紙嘅呢，白色紙嘅而家派緊㗎啦，派到最後一行㗎啦已經嚇。好，有冇人未有嗰個投票嘅票喺手呢？咁唔好兩張票都抌晒落去。咁Eva 會一陣間 pass around 嗰個投票箱俾你哋㗎啦。咁另外我想都 have a show of hands。Can I have a show of hands about who would like to ask questions？ 亦都提一提大家，我哋跟住落嚟呢就會有呢個社企獎勵計劃嘅頒獎典禮。咁如果大家可以即係頒完獎之後繼續留喺度啊嚇。有冇人有問題想問啊 David and Charles? Here? Where? All right. Okay. Anyone? Can I? Well, let me ask the first question. Usually, to warm things up. I think Professor has talked about capitalism and socialism. He mentioned Deng Xiaoping, and I think in one of his books he also mentioned the black cat and the white cat as well. And for David Bornstein, you also mentioned that a lot of people, when they read the news, it's funny you mentioned radio because I was a radio broadcaster before, that they feel depressed when they listen to the radio every day. Being a social entrepreneur is never an easy thing. I mean, people would treat you as an exception. They would not treat you as norm. And of all the social entrepreneurs that David has interviewed, are there anything in common amongst them? And usually, in your experience, Professor, when people are treated as an exception to the society, which means being marginalized, what's the best way to reconcile with the society again? David, would like to go first? I mean, what are the commonalities between all social entrepreneurs?
You know, because the field is growing so dramatically, it's harder to find pure commonalities than it used to be. I would say, you know, if I have to boil it down to a few things, I would say that the first thing that I find among people who want to be social entrepreneurs as opposed to people who want to be, say, who are doing things less consciously, I would say, is that they're often very connected to a very strong urge inside themselves. They have an understanding of why they're doing something. My sense is that a lot of people live their lives to please other people, to please their parents, to get approval. People who go into social entrepreneurship typically are responding to a very personal need vis-a-vis a problem. So many people I've interviewed who are working with disability, for example, almost everybody I'm working with who is a social entrepreneur in the field of disability has a disabled relative. They're very often responding to that.
I have a related question then. some people told me that it is not the journalist's role to report on solutions or even to find solutions for a society. It is something for the government to do. I know there are government officials here. I mean, is it the role for journalists to explore solutions, or is it entirely the role for social entrepreneurs and politicians and government officials? David.
Oh, I mean, I would
I know
say-
you are doing. I
Yeah.
know you are doing things like this, but people will say that maybe you want to run for president. Maybe.
No. So first of all, it's the journalist's job to report on society and give the world a mirror of society. What's really going on in the world? If people are causing lots of problems, you should report on the problems. If people are responding to those problems with interesting activity, you should report on that activity. You're just supposed to report on what's going on, and then what is the result of that activity? Did it work or didn't it work? You're not supposed to editorialize and say, well, this is the best. You're not supposed to pick winners or advocate for ideas, but you're supposed to report. You know, there are different theories about what journalism is. Some people say it's a first rough draft of history. Journalism is a first rough draft of history. So if you say that that's what journalism is supposed to be, it's supposed to basically capture the activity of the world and reflect it back to people as a feedback system, then you would say you're editing society by only reporting on problems and not reporting on the responses to those problems. You're giving people a distortion of the way the world really is.
Professor?
Well, I think solutions are rare, but they're very precious, and they can be very dramatic. They can be very dramatic. And my favorite resolution is in Les Miserables, where Jean Valjean has come out of prison. Nobody will employ him. Everybody hates him. And he stays the night with the bishop who trusts him, and he steals the silver and runs out into the night. And he's caught by two policemen or two soldiers who bring him back and throw him at the feet of the bishop and said, this man claimed the silver was a gift. And the minister and the bishop says, that is right. But my friend, you left too early. It has surely slipped your mind. You forgot I gave these also. Would you leave the best behind? And he gives him 2 more silver candlesticks on top of what he stole. And then he says, but remember this, my brother. See in this a higher plan. You must use this precious silver to become an honest man. By the witness of the martyrs, by the passion and the blood, God hath raised you out of darkness. I have bought your soul for God. And Jean Valjean changes on that day. He changes forever. He's 18 years in prison. He has nothing but hatred in his heart. And somebody called him a brother, and somebody showed him an act of love, and that completely changed him. So these reconciliations are rare, but they can be beautiful, and they can be very interesting, and we should certainly look for them, and we should certainly study them.
Okay, we talk about reconciliation. Can the media help reconciliation within the society in exploring solutions? David, what do you think?
I think it can. I mean, I don't know what the situation is in Hong Kong, but I can describe the situation today in the United States, which is of extreme polarization, so much so, as many of you have seen with the near default on the US debt, that the Congress can't even work together. One of the problems at Thanksgiving this year was that all these people across the United States were dreading going home for Thanksgiving because they would get into political arguments with their family members. And these are irreconcilable arguments at the point. So why are they irreconcilable? And I would say that part of the problem is that when people when journalists ask the kind of questions that they do every day, which is a do you agree with question. Do you agree that abortion should be legal or illegal? Do you agree that Obamacare is a good law or a bad law? They force people, first of all, to say yes or no, and then to defend a position. On the other hand, when journalists ask how could we improve education? How could we still keep the economy thriving and reduce carbon emissions? What happens is people actually become less polarized and they start thinking about solutions. And this has been shown in a lot of psychological studies. If you ask questions that get people thinking about problem solving rather than defending their positions, you actually get less polarization. So I think that if we improve the feedback loop in society, we will get more reconciliation. Historically, journalism locates conflict in the argument between two opposing sides. Every editor will say, where's the conflict? And there has to be, I agree with global warming, I disagree with global warming, and then you create an article about that, which is facile and in some cases totally idiotic, actually. There's also tremendous conflict in problem solving. The most popular books in the world, the most popular genre of literature globally is the detective story, is the Agatha Christie story, it's Sherlock Holmes, it's Harry Potter. It's how do people solve problems. That's a global universal interest. And there's a lot of conflict in that, in how do you actually solve very difficult problems. How do you improve the housing in Hong Kong? How do you make sure that poor people can get a leg up and so forth? So I would say that if journalism approaches its goal, approaches its job and locates conflict in problem-solving processes and less away from these facile debates that force people into corners, I think we'll get a lot more reconciliation, a lot more interesting conversations too.
Professor?
There are some actually quite simple solutions to recurrent problems which in the West we keep messing up. And my favorite problem is labor relations, management and labor. We've been at each other's throats in Britain and America as long as I can remember. Most southern states are still trying to kill unions after 50 or 60 years. And the answer is absurdly simple. The answer is not to bargain on a set amount of money on the table, because if you do that, then whatever management gets, labor loses, and vice versa. The trick is to bargain about what you are going to create in the future. And if management and workers solve the problem together, they can agree in advance that the workers will get 50% or 40% or 30% or 60% of whatever it is they create. And if you can have wonderful relationships between union and management so long as you bargain over something in the future. And this is not difficult. Germany does it. German trades unions are the major sources of information on better conditions of work and how these raise productivity. In Japan, the workers have 217 implemented suggestions per year.
All right.
That's virtually one every day, 217. And you know what it is for America? It's 0.08. and that's the difference between cultures.
All right. May I now invite Dr. Jane Lee, our chair, to present 2 souvenirs to our keynote speakers today. Jane, thank you. Go ahead, Jane. Thank you, David. Great. I hope we can change journalism together. And thank you, Professor. I hope we can think in circular fashion. All right, let's take a picture. All right， 我哋而家咧就要進入最後點票階段啦。咁我哋咧一開始嘅時候咧就揾咗2隊 band， 一隊咧就來自 Youth Outreach 嘅 Super Moment 啦，咁啊另外一隊咧就來自香港廚房嘅 Wonderful Band， 唔該工作人員。咁我哋咧完都有個表演嘅，用音樂嚟開始，用跳舞嚟完結。咁咧我就揾咗都係 Youth Outreach， 咁啊協清社佢哋今日咧就成班朋友仔戴帽嗰班啊，係啊就係啦。喂，不如上嚟傾兩句先，快啲！嚟！我知道你哋有啲係導師，有啲係學生嘅，但係你哋啲學生又咁後生，啲導師又咁後生，其實邊邊係導師，邊邊係學生咧？其實着咗牛仔褸嗰啲係導師，哦，你哋係導師。咁今日呢陣冇邊個排㗎？
我哋今日排嗰個導師唔喺度啊。係啦。你叫咩名啊？我叫做小肥，係啦。
冇名㗎？
我哋冇㗎，不過其實我哋都係比較一啲熱血啲嘅青年啦。我諗全部都係。
好，咁啊跳完舞翻嚟，我哋就宣佈辯論嘅賽果啦嚇。
First thing I touch is my MP3 file. Throw on my sneakers, rap my people. Now I'm ready to ride. Don't need no breakfast, mom. I got no time. I'm gonna be late, cause there's a party on at 3, and it's 8:15.
Tonight you're gonna see some breaking and some rapping and some breaking and some scratching and some breaking and some graffiti and some breaking, and then you're gonna see some more breaking, more breaking, more breaking, more breaking, more breaking, more breaking, more breaking.
make it, do it, make sense. Harder, better, faster, stronger. Work it harder, make it better, do it faster, make sense, stronger than ever. Hour after hour, work it never over. Work it harder, make it better, do it faster, make sense, stronger than ever. Hour after hour, work it never over. Work it harder, make it better, do it faster, make sense, stronger than ever. Hour after hour, work it never over. Work it harder, make it better, do it faster, make sense, stronger than ever. Work it never over. Work it harder, make it better, do it faster, make sense, stronger than ever. Hour after hour, work it never over.
好，唔該晒 Youth Outreach，俾掌聲佢哋啊！ 我哋咧即刻咧就要開始呢、一個社企獎勵計劃嘅頒獎典禮啦。其實頭先一早可以放人入嚟㗎啦，我唔知啲同事搞錯咗啲咩，真係唔好意思啊，非常之唔好意思。不過咧，我想完結之前呢，就請我哋籌委會主席阿 Jane 啦，今次辯論比賽啊 Amy 啦，同埋阿 Ian 一齊上台咧就講幾句説話啊，關於個辯論比賽嘅，亦都請即係正反雙方兩隊上一上嚟啊，上一上嚟，好，呢邊都得，兩邊都得。嗱，我諗有幾樣嘢我要澄清翻，尤其有好多即係今日會表揚嘅社企會喺度咧。頭先咧有幾個概念，阿 Jane 啊，有幾個概念都錯得好離譜喎，真係。啊，頭先譬如佢哋話社會企業係唔分紅咧，其實香港好多社會企業分緊紅㗎咯喎。啊，即係資料真係錯誤嘅呢一個。第二咧就係點解冇跨國嘅社會企業出現呢？邊個話點解冇跨國社會企業要出現㗎？呢度頭先，你定係佢啊？跨國社會企業有好多間添嘅。有唔止一間，連香港都有一間，嗰間咧就叫黑暗中對話 Dialogue in the Dark。咁啊，阿 Jane，我又發現咗兩大錯誤，你又揾到啲咩嘅 ？Amy 你講埋你啊 ，Ian 你講埋你啊，我哋有啲咩嘢趁其他全香港獲獎嘅社企喺度都順便講埋。
其實我都唔敢講話係咪錯誤嚟嘅 Vincent，即係咧其實頭先佢哋兩隊喺度即係拗緊嘅嘢咧，都好反映呢個社會上對社會企業一啲嘅印象。咁你話佢係錯誤定係錯誤呢？我諗社會企業自己都要努力一啲。係嚇。好
，Ian 啦。
我諗其實今日係大家一齊去投票嘛。其實大家一齊投票嗰時候，你哋嘅意向、你哋嘅一啲嘅改變嘅 idea， 亦都可以俾到我哋呢班嘅大學生呢，有啲嘅新嘅諗法嘅。好。
好，其實咧，即係我哋舉辦呢個辯論比賽咧，係個目的係希望將我哋呢個社企嘅概念啦，係植根於我哋嘅即係同學之中嚇。咁透過個辯論，因為佢哋一定要認識個辯題啊，對於相關嘅問題，佢哋都要有一啲嘅了解啊咁樣樣。咁其實亦都一個好好嘅契機咧，我哋開始將即係社企呢個概念咧廣泛咁樣傳播開去嚇。咁我哋期望咧出年我諗我哋希望都會再辦啦，同埋希望辦得更加大規模啲。OK。
我喺呢度咧就想講，我諗唔好講錯唔錯誤啦 ，Vincent。但係我想有一啲嘅觀念咧，可以大家即係同兩位兩隊嘅 debating team 嘅同學咧，即係探討一下嘅。首先呢，我就想講嗰個定義啊，即係頭先有同學咧就話即係一定係唔賺錢啊、唔分紅啊。咁呢個其實我相信頭先 Vincent 講咗，即係而家喺全球咧或者係香港，其實都啲社會企業佢哋嗰個嘅法律模式，即係佢嗰個註冊模式同佢。亦都係可以，唔係有限制，其實係冇限制嘅。喺香港係冇，喺香港係冇嘅嚇。香港係冇法例係關於社企定義嘅。咁呢個我相信呢，就請即係大家留意下啦。咁其實如果咧你真係睇下我哋嗰3本我們可以改變世界嗰3本書咧嚇，即係我都有份編嘅。咁就即係會幫到你好多。咁第二樣嘢咧就我覺得即係其實輸贏唔計啦，即係。我覺得用例子係一個重要嘅，所以我覺得如果即係唔好淨係用一個例子，係能夠即係用多啲唔同嘅例子，其實 even 反方都可以。如果用多啲例子呢，其實可能對個辯題係都會有幫助。但有一樣嘢呢，我就留意到呢，雙方呢其實都冇 address 一個 point 嘅，就其實社企呢係一個好價值取向嘅一啲嘅討論思維嚟嘅。咁其實頭先阿 Charles 亦都即係喺佢嗰個Keynote 嗰度咧有回應一部分嘅，我自己覺得，即係雖然佢唔係直接喺度回應，但係其實即係講緊呢，我哋喺社會上面係有好多價值觀扭曲嘅問題，而呢樣嘢咧就正正咧喺呢個即係極度嘅資本主義同埋即係全球化講呢個即係極大利潤所產生嘅一啲後遺症。我哋並唔係反對資本主義，其實我自己個人認為咧，即係資本主義優化咗佢嘅所有都係社會企業㗎，分分鐘。咁但係即係嗰個問題就取決於我哋自己嗰個價值嘅取向同埋我哋個思維嗰個問題嚇。咁所以如果我哋頭先喺嗰個辯論嗰度呢，係能夠即係多啲從嗰個價值觀嗰個取向去討論，包括如果琴日大家都聽我講開幕禮啦，係嘛，講即係共融啦、integration 啦，講大家共榮共享啦等等嘅呢啲嘅價值觀嘅時候呢，咁所以其實可能對我哋即係講嗰個嘅辯論嗰個議題呢，係會帶啲幫助嘅。咁同埋最後，我想希望各位同學呢，就將來即係我哋做辯題嘅時候呢，就唔單止係為拗贏嗰個題目，而係呢，即係真係個心係點樣去諗嗰樣嘢，而係令到嗰個題目呢，係辯論之後呢，係更加有意義同埋更加清楚。唔該晒。
好，咁我諗阿 Jane 講得好啱嘅。我哋香港社會企業如果俾到同學有呢個印象呢，我哋都應該要努力啲去 clarify 翻。咁啊唔緊要啦，我哋不如先頒咗呢頭先幾位都商討咗呢，今日嘅最佳辯論員呢，就係正方嘅結辯。 係你叫咩名啊？
我叫 Henry。
好。阿 Jane 頒獎啦。好，一齊影張相。另外最佳台下發問呢，我聽唔清楚佢個名，就係着紫色衫嘅一位女仔嘅，係啦，係你啦，係 hello。咁佢會獲得500蚊書券，同埋我哋有份紀念品俾翻佢嘅，紅色嗰，係啦，呢個來自呢個社聯 Good Goods， 叫做 Goodbye 呢個產品，但係佢 Good Goods 嘅鋪頭裏邊有隻 Goodbye 嘅，係。咁你唔好同社企 goodbye 喎，你要繼續幫襯喎。你叫咩名啊
Alfia。
多謝晒你。好啦，影張相啦，我哋。好多謝晒。咁啊，其實今日我哋有112個票投咗嘅。咁啊 Jane 就呢邊有44票。呢邊有58票，咁所以勝方呢就係中文大學嘅。好啦，不如咁啦，我哋交俾阿 Jane 啊、Amy 同阿 Ian 頒獎啦，好嘛？嚟，好，金色喺嗰邊，銀色喺呢邊。好啦，我哋2分鐘後就正式開始啦。好多謝香港大學，多謝中文大學。阿 Dr. Lee、Amy 同阿 Ian 企中間啦。好，俾掌聲兩間大學啊！好多謝晒。好，多謝晒兩隊嚇。咁啊，好啦，事不宜遲啦。咁啊，亦都同翻咁多位再次講一聲唔好意思。我知道頭先你哋企咗喺門口好耐。